Allison said, I'm a neuropsychologist here at the Penn Memory Center, and I work in the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center. I see patients here. My interests are really very broadly in brain behavior relationships and in caring for patients and families who are living with cognitive change in aging. And so some of my research is on helping individuals increase behaviors that would be helpful to them in supporting brain health, and also supporting just their day-to-day, doing the things that they need to do to get all the important, sometimes mundane activities that we need to do day-to-day to get those done. And my other area of work is in looking at how lifelong experiences affect cognition as we change, and also in early detection of cognitive impairment. So those are some of the things that I do and some of the areas that I work in. But today we're really going to be focusing on cognition and daily functioning and compensatory strategies, and how to use strategies to help out with with our daily functioning. What are some of the tools that we can employ for ourselves, for our loved ones? Some of these may be helpful to you yourself. Some of them may be helpful to your loved ones, friends, family, and others. And so, finding the right fit for these kinds of strategies is sometimes a trial and error process. And as we're kind of talking through some of the different approaches today, I would encourage you to think about, how would I apply this to my life, or how would my loved one apply this to their life? How would we do that together? I think it can be really helpful to kind of brainstorm through how you might use some of these strategies. And we can talk more about those and those kinds of brainstorms and ideas in the question and answer period. So let me get this to our next slide. All right. So we're going to talk about kind of approaches to maintaining cognitive health, but we're really going to focus on some of the strategies, external and internal compensatory strategies, and review approaches for increasing and maintaining cognitive activity. There are, some of the main areas that we always talk about trying to maintain are cognitive activities, so doing cognitively challenging activities, exercise, and social activities. We want to be doing as much of those things as we can to help to support cognitive health. And so sometimes compensatory strategies can help us do that, help us increase the amount of time we're spending on them, help us maintain new routines when we want to incorporate them into our day-to-day. Some of the things that can get in the way of that is some of the changes that happen either in aging or different disease processes. So things like forgetfulness, right? You may mean to exercise, but it may slip your mind that day. It may be hard to get into a routine. Slower processing speed. That's something that many individuals may experience. And so it may be the case that some of the cognitive activities that you used to do may not feel like the right match, and you may some individuals may want to find other kinds of activities that would be a better match. It may be more difficult to multitask. So when we're trying to socialize and exercise and do something cognitively challenging, if we're doing all these things at once, that may be very difficult. So trying to pick one thing at a time and focus on that can sometimes be really helpful. Inattention, deciding you're going to do one activity and then getting distracted by another and getting pulled away and going in another direction and then having to get yourself back on track. Those can get in the way of those kind of daily activities and functions that we need to do to get the things done that are really important for everyday life. So figuring out some strategies to get around that inattention. And then word finding difficulty. This is one that comes up a lot. We'll talk about some special cases of word finding difficulty, names of people, which is something that comes up very often for many people, especially as we age. So just to do a little background, there are lots of risk factors for changes in cognition that we experience throughout our whole lifespan. Some of these are in early life, things that once we become adults, we can't really do much about those. But then there are some in midlife that we may be working on, members may be working on managing. And then in later life, there are also modifiable risk factors that we can be working on. And so we want to really be focused on those risk factors that we can do something about, that we can make a change in, things like that, the physical activity, social connectedness, and other changeable factors. So when we think about modifiable risk factors, there are some medical risk factors that people would hopefully be working with their primary care physicians on, trying to reduce the risk of things like vascular disease. And then there are things that we can be working on down here below, the low mental stimulation, low physical activity, social activity, addressing low mood and problems with sleep. And we can use strategies, compensatory strategies, to address some of these areas and to try to get around some of these typical problematic areas of cognition that may get in the way of doing those activities. So we'll talk first about compensation. And I think about this as kind of working around the problem area. We do this throughout our lives in lots of different ways. Everyone has areas of strength and weakness that they have had throughout their entire lives. And we tend to make accommodadations for ourselves throughout our lives by, noticing that we are better when we, say for, someone who works better in the nighttime, they do more of their work then at night. They compensate for the fact that, in the morning, they're not going to be able to get work done in a way that they really want to. So we compensate for these differences between individuals. There are some people who hear information and they grab that information and they hold on to it very easily. And other people really need to see it or write it down. And so we learn that about ourselves throughout our lives, and we make those adjustments. As we're aging and as different disease processes may change our areas of cognitive strength or weakness, we may need to shift the way in which we compensate again. And that's not necessarily an easy task because we have to notice it, we have to see it, we have to come up with a plan, we have to implement that plan, and then make it a habit. And so it takes a lot of kind of introspection and observation, kind of being a scientist in your own life about your own activities or a loved one's activities. When do I see the problems come up the most? In what situations? What's happening? Are there a lot of people around? And that's when it's harder for my spouse to, have a conversation. Is it in the morning or is it at night? These kinds of factors, kind of noticing what those trends are for you or for that other person. And then coming up with the strategies that are specific to that problem area. Whenever I think about putting a compensatory strategy in place, I always think about doing one thing at a time. We talked about in the beginning, multitasking can be difficult. It's difficult for everyone. We all overestimate how good we are at it. In this case, I would say take one problem area at a time and come up with a plan for that area and implement that and test that out and see how that goes, instead of trying to do multiple things at once, because that can get frustrating for everyone involved. So we'll talk a little bit about this compensatory strategy first. So, changing behaviors and creating habits. I'm sure everyone listening has tried to change their habits at some point about something, right? Whether it's trying to exercise more or trying to, change the time that you go to sleep and have a sleep routine. Those things are great to do for helping with better sleep, oftentimes better mood, and helping with increased physical activity. But those changes are hard to start and to make stick. So we need to kind of take a really mindful approach to it. So some of the things that I think about is, first we want to target the behaviors that we think are most important. So for example, if you're trying to, exercise more or increase that cognitive activity, challenging cognitive activities more, those are things that will help to reduce risk. We want to set achievable goals. We don't want the New Year's resolution type problem where we set a lofty goal and then we inevitably don't meet it, and that's very frustrating. And so if we set very small goals that are achievable and we can achieve those in small increments, that will help us get to kind of the next step. Another piece is pairing new behaviors with old behaviors. So old habits we do automatically, brushing your teeth, probably something that you do on a regular basis and you don't think about it all that much. Those are the kinds of things that you want to pair new habits with. Whether it's, putting a reminder note next to your toothbrush so that you see it every morning and it reminds you that, oh, yep, I wanted to, do 10 minutes of floor exercise or chair exercise. And that is right there next to your old habit so that you can create that new habit. You want to build slowly over time. So you don't want that note to say, go out and walk for an hour when you haven't been walking in the last 6 months. You would want that note to say, go out and walk for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and slowly build that over time. Those small achievable goals that you can build over time are the ones that are most likely to be successful. You also want to make a concrete plan. You actually want to plan out those small goals and that build over time. At the end, we'll kind of go through some examples of that. And you want to reevaluate it periodically. Maybe that was not the plan you came up with at the beginning was not the one that you realize is going to be sustainable for you. So reevaluate it. Maybe you need to change something. Maybe the weather changed. And so your exercise plans changed. Maybe your plan was to have more socialization and the person that, you planned that socialization with has moved away. And so you need to reevaluate that plan. So next thing is give it time. It takes a while for habits to be established. And it really depends on how often you're doing that habit, right? So if you're doing something once a month, it's going to take more than just a few weeks to establish that because you have to have many instances of doing that habit over time. If you're doing something multiple times a day, it's going to take less time to build that habit because you have that practice happening multiple times a day, every day. So give it time and give it time based on how often you're actually doing that activity. And the last thing is really, I think, maybe one of the most important ones is have a plan for getting back on track because inevitably something will come up to change that habit, to get you away from whatever the schedule is. It might be a trip, it might be a visitor, it might be an illness, whatever it is. We've learned, a lot over the last few years that life is quite unpredictable. And so having kind of flexibility about getting back on track and doing that reevaluation of kind of what's going to work now can be really, really helpful. Okay. So what are some of the concrete things that people can do to be working on a system for starting activities, changing activities, having a habit, and having that be something that is structured? So in one of the groups that I ran for several years, in cognitive fitness, we would use what we call external memory devices. People use these all the time in cognitive remediation therapy. Most people have used all kinds of external memory devices. It's just a fancy name for saying you need to write things down, right? We need to capture that information somewhere about what your plan is for your habits, for your schedule, for your activities, for your activity changes. But you want a system that works for you. So here I've got two different kinds of ways of going about it. The typical paper and pencil, strategy is one that works for a lot of people. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. There are pros and cons to using paper versus electronic, but you want to use the thing that works for you, that you're most comfortable with, that you are going to be able to go back to and use day after day and rely on. When your memory is not as reliable as it used to be, you want something else that's going to be more reliable so that when those memory slips come, if they do, you can go to that system. So on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see this is kind of the one of the books that we've used, but you can get this kind of setup in many day planners out there, where you have, a place where you're going to write down all of the things that you're going to do as scheduled events. And then you have a place for to-do items that can be done at any time. And then a place for notes. Now, journaling can be, what you're feeling about the day, what you're feeling about your experiences. It can also be notes that give you some of the details of the experiences that you have, so that 2 weeks later, when you're about to see the person again that you say saw on this date, you can go back to the last time you saw them and say, oh, these were the things that we talked about. These are some of the important, items from that conversation that I wanted to remember so that, I could make that connection with this person again. But if our memories are not going to be reliable for all that information, write down some of the really key pieces. You're doing that for a couple of reasons. You're doing that because writing it down is going to be a way to reinforce it in your own memory. And it's going to be a record for you to go back to. Just reading it again after, a day or two can also reinforce that information. And so, you can give yourself practice on it over time if it's something that's really important. There are lots of conversations that you probably would not want to do that with. But if it's an important conversation with important content that you really want to be able to come back to, that's when you would use that kind of journaling. The flexibility of these kinds of setups, to have the scheduled activities and the to-do activities that are at any time, just allows for the different kinds of activities that you have during the day. You can do this on paper, like I said. You can also do this electronically. Some people really like to use their phones or a tablet that connects to a computer so that you have that information in multiple places. Some people like to use voice to text because that is a little bit easier than typing in. If those things are not appealing to you, then you would use the paper and pencil. So, I think finding the platform that works for you is more important, and the one that you feel most comfortable with. You just want it to have these components. You want it to have a schedule, you want it to have a to-do list, and you want to have a place where you can write those notes so that you can come back to those. These are these external sort of brain extenders, is how we kind of think about them. I think I went over many of the things on this slide, but really just to drive home that you can replicate these kinds of approaches in pocket calendars, a small calendar that you can fit in your pocket, fit in your purse, or mobile devices. Some of the advantages or disadvantages of each of these, a pocket calendar, you don't have to charge it. You don't have to fiddle with buttons. You just have it written there and you can find that information quite easily. It may be more familiar, might be more comfortable. For other people, mobile devices might be more familiar and more comfortable. The positive aspects of having a mobile device is that it's often backed up to a cloud-based system, so that if you lost it, you misplaced it, that information will be somewhere else, you could recover it. So that's one of the kind of main advantages of that. Also, sometimes people will like to share their calendars with a loved one, and that can be helpful too. The last thing that I think is one of the real advantages of electronic, that you don't get with the paper and pencil, is that electronic scheduling systems can alert you. So it can alert you to when, activities are coming up, of course, scheduled activities, to-do lists, things like that. So, you want to kind of weigh those things out and figure out what would work best for you. If you tried a mobile device and it didn't work for you, and you left it on the kitchen table every day, you didn't want to carry it with you, that's not going to work. What you want is a system that's going to have all of these things in it. It's going to be centralized in one place. So not 5 different notebooks all over the place, not multiple electronic devices, just one place for all that information, so that you only have to look in that one spot. And you want it to be portable, because you want it to go with you wherever you go. It needs to be with you when you get a phone call. It needs to be with you when you're out of the house. So, a reliable external memory device is going to have that feature of being able to be carried with you whenever you need it. So those are some of the external devices that can be helpful. So we're going to talk a little bit about internal devices. And these mnemonic devices, or memory tricks, are probably things that you have used earlier in life. Maybe when you were studying for tests, or you just heard them used as a way to learn information that's hard to remember. You can use those again to help with learning, remembering, recalling information that is hard to remember now. And so these techniques make the learning easier. They can be helpful for recalling new information or more complex information like passwords. This is an example of, how people learn how many days are in each of the months. 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31 except for February. So that's one approach, right? People learn that, and then they can use that as a way to get to the information. This one is looking at your knuckles and being able to use that. So lots of different types of devices. Using acronyms can be helpful. So Roy G. Biv, this is the way that we remember the colors of the rainbow. That can be helpful when you're learning new information that is hard to remember on its own. It's not related to each other, so you need to have it be related to each other in some way. You need to kind of create that connection. And that is a a kind of a theme throughout most mnemonic devices is that you're trying to create a connection between old information and new information, or more salient information and new information, something that kind of sticks with you. And so you can do that using acronyms. You can use that using what's called acrostics. So this is when you have a sentence of some kind or a series of words of some kind that you can use the first letters of or pieces of that known sentence, right? So if you grew up on 6 Market Street, this would be a known sentence to you. It would be an easy thing for you to recall. But the password that it creates here at the end is one that is a much more complex password. And so, using these kinds of devices for passwords can be very helpful. Passwords is one of the things that I often hear from people. This is a real problem for me to remember these new passwords. It's a common problem across most people. And so for certain passwords, these might be the approaches that you take. Probably not going to do this for all of them, but there might be, the one main password that you use often that you use these kinds of approaches with. Another mnemonic is the method of loci. So this is one that has been used for just centuries. It's a very old kind of trick that is really quite successful for people to use. It is because you're connecting really well-known visual information with new information. So think right now in your mind about either where you live right now, if you've lived in that place for a long time, or sometimes people think of their childhood home or the home they lived in the longest, or apartment you've lived in the longest, and kind of picture yourself walking through it. What do you see when you come in the door? What do you see when you turn the first corner? Are there stairs? What happens at the top of the stairs? What do you see? You probably have a pretty vivid picture of what is around you. And so you can use the method of loci for something like, in this case, I'm thinking of running errands. Okay, so say you are running errands and you need to first pick up your glasses, and then you need to pick up your medications, and then you need to get the dog some food. So you've got 3 errands to run. You might use your external memory device, right? You may write these things down on your list, put it in your pocket or on your phone, put that in your pocket so that you have that there. If you don't have those things available to you, or if you want to try a different approach, you can use something like the method of loci. So, this is an example of, this is someone's house. What they're going to do is try to picture something that is related to that errand in a part of their house. So they're coming up the stairs to their house, and they see there's a tree that's in front of their house, and there are eyeglasses hanging from the tree like leaves. So that is a very odd visual image to have, but the more odd, absurd the image, the more memorable it will be for you. And so picturing this tree with the leaves that are in the form of glasses is an image that may stick with you. Then you're kind of walking through the house and you need to think of, okay, the next thing I need to do on my errands is I need to get my medication. So you're walking down this is how you would go to get to your car. So you're walking down the hallway and you're picturing this entire hallway covered with lots of different pills, not a safe environment, but an absurd one. And so you're picturing this kind of carpet of pills. You walk through that carpet of pills out to get to your car because you have to go on your errands, and you picture your dog sitting on top of your car. You have a little tiny dog that could never get on top of your car, so that's odd too. So you have these visual images in mind that are associated with each of these 3 chores that you have to do, and they're in places in your home that you can walk through and you can see. And so that helps to then, when you're out on the road, you can't get to your phone. You shouldn't be looking at your phone while you're driving. Shouldn't be pulling things out of your pocket and reading them. You can say, okay, I'm going to do that walk through my home. I just got my glasses. What was the next thing? Oh, right. I'm walking down the hall and there's that carpet of pills that is very unsafe. Okay, so the next thing I have to do is go to the drugstore and get up my medications. So that's kind of how you would use that in daily life. That linkage between that information can help to make it stick and help you to be able to recall it at a later date. And people with some memory difficulties can use these as well. Each of these types of strategies, the internal strategies and the external strategies, some will be better fit, some will be not as a good fit for people who have some memory difficulties, but you want to kind of match them with make a good match between the internal and external strategy and the individual, and try them out, see if that works. If that works, then you build on that. Maybe you use it for more information. If it doesn't work, you try something else. So we're going to just do just a little kind of example here for you to get an idea of how you might do this in your own mind. So I'm going to ask you to learn the following list by creating a mental image of the two items that's very vivid in their interaction. And so I'm going to help you with 2 of these. So the other ones you're kind of on your own for. I'm going to ask you to try not to write these down, but you're trying to remember these pair: cow, banana; bird, fruit; dress, money; house, mountain. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to do this method of loci, and we're going to go into our bathroom. This is a very beautiful tub in your bathroom, and there's a cow in your tub, which is odd because you don't have a cow. And then there are bananas with the cow in your tub, which is odd because I don't think cows eat a lot of bananas. And so this is an image that you can picture in the bathroom of your house to help you remember the pairing of those 2 words. And then we're going to try to remember dress and money together and try to pair those and use a mnemonic for those. So we're going to picture our closet, and we're going to picture dresses that are made out of money hanging in your closet. Odd, because you probably don't have a dress in your closet made out of money, but you can picture it there in the closet, your closet, the one you know where it is. Maybe it's right outside, the next door down after your bathroom. So you've got that bathroom with the cow and the bananas in the tub, and then you walk down the hall into your bedroom and you've got these dresses that are made of money. So later on we'll come back to those, but just think in your mind about the connection between those words and their pairs. Okay, so we'll get back to those later. So I said that we would get to a specific example or a specific instance of word finding difficulty. And one of the most difficult things for people to come up with is the names of people. And it's really hard. And it's hard because it's very arbitrary. There are very unique associations between a person and their name. You can meet 5 different people with the same name and they look very different. And it's really hard to recall that that's the pairing that you need for each of those people. But we all feel in some way like this is important because it is something that causes people a lot of distress when they can come up with those names. And so, we'll talk about a couple of different approaches to that. So, and we feel it's important because it allows you to connect with someone, tell them that they're important to you by calling them by their name, you really remember them. But it's not always important, right? So sometimes it may be really the conversation that you're having that's most important, or it's a one-time encounter, or you can work around the name in some way. We'll talk about some of those workarounds. But, kind of thinking about whether or not, one, it's really important in this situation to kind of give yourself a break. If it is the case that, this is not someone you're going to be coming into contact with a lot. And to be able to use, some of these approaches. So one of them is to make a meaningful connection between the name and the person's appearance or voice. Now, this is something that you're only doing in your own mind. You don't have to share this information. It's really about you trying to make a connection between the person and the person's name and something about them that is going to trigger that memory for that name. So, someone could, make those connections if it happens to be the case that they really can find something unique, but that's not always going to happen. But that's one thing that you can try. You also can try some things within the conversation to try to encourage remembering that information. So you might repeat the person's name in conversation by saying, so you're meeting Bob. Nice to meet you, Bob. So Bob, did you watch the game last night? Hope to run into you again, Bob. If you say it in quick succession, it sounds a little bit forced, but if you kind of scatter it throughout your conversation, it can really be much more natural. And you'll notice that other people do this. People who are really trying to learn names will do this quite a bit. You may have had the experience of trying to go through the alphabet. So that can sometimes be helpful. It is often easier to come up with a word if you know the first sound of it. So even beyond the first letter, the first kind of phoneme or unit of sound. So ba, be, bo, that can be helpful in trying to pull it up. If you're really searching, you really need to try to find that name. Getting that first phoneme can often pull the rest of it back. This is something that we do when we're doing testing for coming up with words, specific words for objects. When someone has difficulty coming up with the word on their own, we'll often give the first part of the word, and then they'll be able to come up with the rest of it many times. And so you can give yourself that cue by doing that alphabet work. Less often useful, but can help sometimes, is finding something in common with another person of the same name, some way to connect them, because if you already know, going back to that, connect new information with old information. So you know this other person, you know them really well, you know their name without a problem. And there's some connection with this new person of the same name, this Bob and this Bob both, are really into a particular sports team or really like to cook, something about them that connects them. And so you can try to make that connection in your mind, and that can be helpful. Picturing that new person doing that activity. So say they both like to cook. Picturing them cooking together can be, a kind of a funny picture. These people don't know each other, but you can picture that, and that can be helpful for pulling back up that information later on. This next one, you do with permission, but taking a picture on your phone, if you have a smartphone and you use that for your contacts, taking a picture and connecting it with the person's name and number, and maybe a couple of things about them, where you met them, who else they're connected to. If you're trying to remember their family members' names, putting them in that contact as well. Trying to have, this is kind of a combination of, using those external devices, so those external memory devices. So putting that contact in and then adding in some notes to help you connect that information. And that can be helpful for this last point, which is to review names and details before you go into a gathering where you might encounter some of those people. So I know that in some retirement communities, there are kind of books, Facebooks with pictures and names of the people who live in the community. And I've known of people who will make note of the people that they often see and then can review that before they go, say, to a gathering where they're likely to see those individuals. If you, have a regular group you meet up with, so you're socializing with a group for a book club or for, a support group or something else, to have a little notes page, maybe in that book that you use or in that phone, where you're going to put down the person's name and a little bit about them. Just a couple of details can sometimes be enough of a cue to help bring that other information back and to kind of fill in your internal bio about that person. Okay, so those are some of the mnemonics, some of the internal devices that you can use, some external devices that you can use. And now we'll talk a little bit about kind of engagement and cognitive training, which I think is I've always thought of as a little bit of a controversial topic, but people often are asking about it. So in terms of engagement, social activities are sometimes in some settings are really easy to kind of go out and find people with similar interests. In other settings, it's much more difficult. But being deliberate about it and thinking about the kinds of activities that someone might enjoy sharing with a group of people. And that can really be, something that allows someone to also have increased cognitive challenge and cognitive demand just by being in a social setting, by sharing an activity. That there's a lot that goes into that. And so that can really be both a social and cognitively challenging activity. Social activities can be just making calls, getting on a Zoom. So increasing and improving communication can increase socialization. And, you can use those external devices like the book or the phone to, really make a schedule for social connections. It really can sometimes take very deliberate action to say, you know what, I always say that I'm going to call my cousins, and I always forget. Or, we've meant to get together for months and months and months, and it never happens. And so making it deliberate, doing it mindfully by saying, okay, I'm going to actually schedule it into that book and schedule in who I'm going to call each week. And each week I'm going to call a different person. And I'm going to make that a part of my habit. Having it written can make a huge difference in being able to really kind of get going on it. Just so that you can see it there. You see it in your own writing that you meant to do it. If it's for a loved one and you're helping them with their book, writing it in their book in agreement with them. Like, this is an activity you wanted to do. Can we write it in here so that you'll be prompted to do that on a weekly basis? Seeking out different kinds of opportunities, volunteer opportunities, continuing education, community involvement, all of these things, are going to be different depending on where you live and what is available to you and what kind of resources you have for getting out and getting involved in them, or doing them from home via more, video-based involvement. But really taking a look at those activities, what activities would be really both enjoyable and fulfilling, and being deliberate about those as well, and being deliberate about how you're going to get involved. Maybe there's a volunteer opportunity you've wanted to do for a long time, but there are a couple of steps to doing it. your goal may not be, I'm going to volunteer, 3 times a week for the next year. That's a big goal. That's likely a goal that we can't fulfill immediately. But maybe if you break that down and say, okay, so I really would like to volunteer here, volunteer there. My first goal is to just go online and figure out what their hours are and what their phone number is. And then maybe next week I'm going to give them a call. And so making those small steps to move towards that goal, especially if you have a very busy schedule, if you have a lot of responsibilities, that where a big goal like that feels insurmountable, but a small goal like going on the computer for 5 minutes feels a little bit more doable. So thinking about those small goals. In terms of cognitive activity, whatever it is, you want it to be enjoyable. These shouldn't be activities that feel arduous, that feel like you have to kind of trudge through them. They should be, it may be having conversations with people you typically aren't talking with. It may be, reading books and discussing them. It might be doing puzzles. It might be, going to a museum and learning about, some of the art there, going on a tour. It should be challenging. So there should be something that is challenging about these activities, because what you want to be doing is stretching a little bit when you're doing these activities. That's going to feel very different for different people depending on the activity. So this is where finding the activities that are right for you or for your loved one is really important. And sometimes it's a swing and a miss. When you try an activity first, you say, oh, it's actually like really simple. I'm not engaged, or it's too much. And it's something it's not enjoyable because I can't engage in it. So finding that sort of happy medium is important, and that can take some time. These activities should be activities that the challenge might be defined as not being able to multitask as you're doing that activity, right? If you are learning about new art at a new art exhibit, it would be pretty hard to multitask and do something else while you're doing it, right? You want to be focusing on that. If it's, going and taking a walk in nature and learning about, some of the foliage, learning about animals, those are things that require focus and attention. And so whatever the activity is, if it's puzzles in a book, it should maintain your focus, and it should challenge you. It should have the potential for getting more difficult over time with your successes. So as you're getting better, you should be able to kind of push it a little bit and, do something that's a little bit harder. If you think about it, like you think about physical activity, that sometimes is an easy analogy, because when you think about physical activity, if you're working really hard, you can kind of only do that one physical activity at a time, right? If you're working hard and you're, bicycling, or you're walking really fast or running, high intensity activity, you can't really have conversations with other people. You have to you're really focused on that one activity. And with physical exercise, you do, you say you lift a weight for a while, you build up to the next weight up. Same idea in cognitively challenging activities. You want to kind of increase that over time. A bonus can be kind of combining something that is cognitively challenging with social engagement or physical exercise, right? So if you're outside and doing a nature walk and you're learning, but you're also exercising, that's great. It's kind of a 2-for-1. If you are learning a new activity in a group setting, you're socializing and learning at the same time and really stretching yourself. And so again, being able to do those things at once can be really helpful. So we want it to be enjoyable, challenging, potential for increased difficulty over time. And if you can combine a couple at the same time, even better. So this is just, I'm not showing a lot of data today, but this is one that I just wanted to show as an example of high cognitive activity and low cognitive activity. So this was a study that looked at kind of passive learning versus active learning. So passive learning was just kind of, having, learning some information, but not really engaging in it. Active learning in this case was learning how to do photography and then learning the really technical aspects of printing out and creating prints. Or the other group was learning how to quilt, but learning not just how to do the sewing, but how to do the patterns. And so these groups of individuals were in the high cognitive activity group, where they were doing the quilting or the photography and really learning the technical aspects of that. And they looked at both these high and low activity groups, and they looked at before and after. And this was the group that was in the high activity group. And they both did better over time, but the people who were doing that really intensive engagement in an activity did even better in terms of their memory scores afterwards. So that that really intensive engagement can be really helpful in getting some of those better outcomes. So I'm just going to talk briefly about some of the computerized brain training programs, because oftentimes people will ask about them. They really require people to consistently engage with them. The idea of these programs is to exercise enough to the point of change and to kind of build on this idea of brain plasticity, where you can make changes in connections within the brain by doing repetitive, challenging activities. There have been some successes in the research literature in this area, but not overwhelmingly so. This is one study that I'll show you that used the Brain HQ or Posit Science program, where they looked at people. This is 40 sessions, so this is 40 hours of being on this computer program, and they did show improvements over time. There is some data to show some sustained improvement over time, years out. But there are lots of other computerized programs on the market, and I haven't seen any convincing evidence from these other computer programs that there are really sustained benefits. And in fact, Lumosity, that was very popular a while back, had a lot of very over-the-top claims about their product and were fined by the FTC because of these overblown claims. And so, when I think about people putting in time and effort into these computerized programs, what I usually say when people ask for advice on this is, if you're going to use one of these, I usually suggest using the ones that I have seen some evidence of change with. But I say only use them if you're replacing very passive time or like couch potato time with it. Not if you're going to replace time you would otherwise be using for socializing or cognitive, like other cognitively stimulating activity that takes you away from the computer and doing some stimulating, challenging activities that that you can engage in that really change with you over time and that you can grow with. So that's my short spiel on the computerized training programs. There's also been some work on combining lots of different lifestyle change approaches. So diet, exercise, cognitive training, and monitoring vascular risk factors in large studies. This one is one that came out a while back, but there's one that's currently ongoing, I think just closed. And what they're really doing is looking at when we control our diet, when we exercise, when we're really challenging ourselves cognitively, and we're helping to control those risk factors, can we improve our outcomes? And one of the outcomes, the one that I'm often most interested in, is the cognitive outcome. And they showed improvement in trajectory over time. So this is over 2 years in several of their cognitive factors. So this is at baseline, 2 months and 24 months. And the red line is those with the intervention, and the blue line is those that did not have this 2-year intervention. And so they're showing, real promise. And if we're doing all of these things to help to support our cognitive activities and our physical health, that we can see these positive outcomes. And this is just the study that is, I believe, just ended. And this was one that was going on across the world, doing these kinds of multimodal interventions where they're trying to help with increasing physical exercise, cognitive exercise, and maintaining those health risks. Okay, so the last few things before we get to some questions is how to approach some of these habit changes that you're thinking of, perhaps doing, or increasing, some of these changes in your kind of day-to-day, everyday schedule. The approach that, we usually try to think about it are these SMART goals. So like thinking about something, a very specific goal, that's measurable, that's attainable, right? So we don't want that goal of changing your exercise habits overnight. You want it to be attainable, so slow and changed slowly over time. You want it to be relevant. It should make a difference for you, for your loved one, and you want a schedule for it. You want kind of a schedule for how you're going to make those changes. Here are some examples, of goals that I've worked on with people across these different areas. Psychological wellness goals, so engaging in regular mindfulness practice, working up to engaging in psychotherapy, cognitive wellness goals, journaling, engaging in reading, crosswords, and so on. So I often think about these kind of different bins of activity and areas of change that you might think about for yourself or for your loved one. And these are some of the ones that we most frequently are thinking about. And then this is just an example of trying to kind of break it down and slowly build up to a goal, which in this case would be, I want to engage in regular mindfulness practice because feeling very anxious, and I'm trying to help to use some more tools to manage, daily stress or anxiety. And so just saying, I'm going to do 15 to 30 minutes of mindfulness every day right off the bat is probably, for most people, not going to be a successful goal. But can you kind of slowly break it down into smaller steps, figure out what kind of the barriers are and how to approach those barriers. So if it's forgetting to practice, maybe it needs to be in a book or in that electronic device, or, a note next to the toothbrush that says, go back to, sitting on the side of the bed for 10 minutes after you brush your teeth to do your mindfulness practice, whatever it is that kind of brings you back to that practice. So last thing before we end, I just wanted to come back to those pairs of words. So you can shout it out loud. We can't hear you right now, or you can think about it in your head. Do you remember what goes with each of these words? And see are you able to remember, what went with cow and dress more easily than what went with bird and house. We spent a little bit of time in visualizing a cow in kind of a funny situation in our home, and the dress in a funny situation in our home. And so Can you recall what went with those? And I'll give you the clue for the cow, so say if you're using that method of loci, walking through your house, you go into the bathroom, in your mind, you see that tub, what was in that tub? And then you turn the corner, you go into the bedroom, you see that closet, what was in that closet? So these were the things that went with our first words. These were our pairs. And, using those mnemonics, maybe that helped you. Maybe in this case, you wanted to use an external device. Maybe you need to write those down so that you can look at them later. Whatever the device is for you, that's the best pairing. So last take-home messages, just thinking about the lifestyle choices and the day-to-day activities that are most protective of brain health, changing our behaviors to use new strategies to support memory and organization, and using individual sets of goals to plan for continuing to stay on track, or importantly, get back on track to meet those goals.